Welcome to another edition of Take 5. We are in Luke chapter 22, verse 54. Then they seized him and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house, and Peter was following at a distance. And when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat down among them. Then a servant girl, seeing him as he sat in the light and looking closely at him, said, "This man also was with him." But he denied it, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." And a little later someone else saw him and said, "You also are one of them." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." And after an interval of about an hour still another insisted, saying, "Certainly this man also was with him, for he too is a Galilean." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are talking about." And immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the saying of the Lord, how he had said to him, "Before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. Well, what do you want to say about this? This is tough to read because Peter was one of Jesus' absolute closest friends. It was hard to read what Judas did. Very hard. But this is even tougher because, Peter was one of the 3. There were the 12, and then there was the 3. It was Peter, James, and John. Peter's the one that walked on water. Peter was the one that seemed to always have his foot in his mouth. But Peter's also the one, when Jesus said, "Who does the crowd say I am?" Peter said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Peter's the one that Jesus gave the keys to the kingdom to. I'm not sure Jesus has a favorite, but if you had to pick one guy of the 12, Peter would not be a bad bet. And so here he is. And Peter had said, "I will go to the death with you." And Jesus had told Peter, remember, he said, "Satan has asked for permission to sift you as wheat." You personally, Peter, more than any of the rest. He wants to single you out and sift you as wheat. But Jesus said, "I've prayed for you, that your faith may not fail." And you read this passage and you say, well, did Jesus' prayer come true? Because it looks like Peter's faith was failing. No. It's not what happened here. Peter's faith didn't fail, but Peter did get scared, and Peter responded to that fear. He's sitting down, and they're asking who he is. He sees what's going on with Jesus, and he doesn't want the same thing to happen to him. So he denies knowing him. Now that's hard. It's hard to read, and yet we've done that. This is the one that is hard because I know I find myself very much like Peter. And I know there have been times when I've denied knowing him. When you act in ways that don't show you're a Christian, you're denying knowing Jesus. It doesn't mean you've lost your faith, but you're certainly not doing what you should be doing. And so we've done that too. And yet Jesus told Peter he would. And he said, "Before the cock crows 3 times." And he did. He denied 3 different occasions within a couple hours of each other. And it said on that 3rd one, when the rooster crowed, Jesus turned and looked at Peter. And we know what Peter did. Peter went outside and wept bitterly. I believe Peter was genuinely ashamed. I don't think he was realizing at the time what he was doing, that he was fulfilling this prophecy. He wasn't even thinking that way. And yet he remembered it when Jesus turned and looked at him. He felt guilty, he felt ashamed. And perhaps you think that you're feeling guilty or ashamed because Jesus is looking at you. Well, if you are guilty, that's okay, but you've got to let Jesus take that over. And this was definitely a rift in the relationship between Jesus and Peter. But they did patch it up, and we'll read about that when we're in John. Alright, Jesus always patches it up if you're willing, and Peter was certainly willing. Peter became one of the greatest apostles in history, and yet he had a bad day, as we all can. So why don't we give each other some slack if we're having a bad day? Because Peter had a pretty bad one here, as did Jesus. We're going to keep reading more about this on the next edition of Take 5.